Welcome and thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Karin England. I'm a landscape architect and a park planner with Metro Vancouver Regional Parks. And today I'm hosting this half-hour session. It's part 3 of our ongoing series about gardening topics. Before we go any further, I would like to acknowledge that the land that we live on is the shared ancestral homeland of the Coast Salish First Nations. As someone whose work is linked closely to the land, I owe a debt of gratitude for the example set by Indigenous peoples of how to live with a deep connection to the land. Part of my work at Metro Vancouver has been to collaborate on the creation of a free tool that supports people who want to garden in a more sustainable way. And I would like to show you that tool now. I'll just share my screen. This tool is the Grow Green Guide website. You can find it at growgreenguide.ca. And it's got free resources with information on how to grow eco-friendly lawns, gardens, and food, regardless of your skill set, if you're a novice or an expert, or how much space you've got. So it's got 3 different kinds of tools. It's got designs, free downloadable complete designs that you can select, print, and take with you to a garden center. It will give you all the information you need to install and maintain the designs that are included on the website. It's got information about plants that grow well in this region, and it's got resources, a blog site, news, vocabulary, and gardening tips. It also has a mailing list where you can sign up and you can get news about updates and events that are coming up through the Grow Green program. So pretty robust website. It is done in collaboration with the UBC Botanical Garden. So you know that the information that you're getting here is locally appropriate for our growing conditions in our region, and it's been vetted by people who you can really trust. I mean, who do we trust more than the UBC Botanical Garden to give us good gardening advice? So I'll just show you quickly how to navigate to food gardens. You can see we've got designs of all sizes. There's 111 different designs that are available on the website. You can narrow your results based on your area of interest. So let's say that you are interested in growing a food garden. You can see that we've got 42 different plans that we have created that are appropriate for this region. You can select one that looks interesting and you'll be taken to free downloadable plant list and plant maintenance information. So pretty great resource that's available free online at the growgreenguide.ca website. Great. So I'd like to introduce you to today's topic. We had a discussion about food gardening early on. It was so popular, we had lots of requests for a second session on food gardening, which is what we're doing today. Just a reminder that all our videos from our previous sessions are available on the Metro Vancouver Facebook page. So in keeping with our food topic, we looked around for someone who we thought would be a really inspirational speaker. We found Christina Chung. She will be with us today. She has a lifelong fascination with plants. She's a graduate and past program coordinator at the Horticultural Training Program at the UBC Botanical Garden, and is the owner of a garden service called Fluent Garden. Welcome, Christina.
Hi, Karin.
Hi. So nice to see you. Can you tell us just a little bit about your background and why you're so passionate about horticulture?
Yeah, of course. So I guess you would classify me as a career changer. You know, I've worked in offices pretty much my whole working life, and it really wasn't until I had my son a few years ago, and I'm like, oh, I really want to reevaluate what I'm doing with my life, and I wanted to do something meaningful. And I've always grown food. I grew up in a garden, and I'm like, well, maybe this is the opportunity I should take to learn more about plants and how to grow things successfully. And, like I love horticulture because it just gives me this outlet to be creative and just keep learning. I mean, it's not just about the plants, but learning about, the environment, the insects, the other creatures. So, I mean, that's kind of me in a nutshell, I suppose.
It sounds like it's something that was your passion that became your career.
Yes.
And then at some point you decided to start a business called Fluent Garden. Maybe you could tell us a bit about that and what your areas of focus are.
Yeah, so my interest is like edible plants. So my focus for the business is like edible landscape design. So it could be just consulting on, hey, what should I do with my front garden space? Or just like workshop type things, just to give my like input on how to plant things so that plants establish well and actually produce food. Because when you're food gardening, at the end of the day, you want something to harvest and consume. And as a part of the like my business, I also do coaching. So a lot of people, they have a garden or they want to garden, but they really don't know how to get started. And through teaching as the program coordinator at UBC Botanical Garden, I found I really liked that teaching element. I'm like, well, I can translate that into something like for a homeowner wanting to, learn how to prune, learn how to weed. I mean, I just want people to feel comfortable and want to be in their garden and enjoy it. And yeah, that's mainly what I do. And it's just really fascinating just seeing people's gardens and finding out what their interests are.
I just love the idea of having a garden coach. I'd never heard of that before. I met you, someone who can come and show you how to garden. I mean, we hire people to be maybe, life coaches, career coaches, physical fitness coaches, but to have someone who can be a garden coach, I think it's a brilliant idea. Fantastic. Does your kind of work include both small spaces and large spaces?
Yeah, that's a really great question because, when you think of like food gardens, some people may envision like a giant lot just filled with like beds of like vegetables and stuff. But the reality of being in Vancouver and like all the surrounding like cities is that a lot of people are working with smaller spaces. So it could be a patio or even a balcony. And, I've worked for smaller scale garden situations and also larger ones, but it's actually the smaller scale ones that are pretty fun because it forces like myself and the client to think creatively. First narrowing down like, okay, what do you want to eat, and then like how do we maximize the real estate on your balcony, let's say. And for me, for smaller space situations, I always recommend people to grow vertically. A lot of people say, oh, I want to grow tomatoes and this and that, but I don't have enough space on the ground. But by bringing plants vertical, you allow for proper airflow, you allow the plant to capture a lot of sunlight, you open up the access to flowers for proper pollination, and really you bring them up nice and high, and that leaves a lot of soil area or like container media area to plant things like your leafy greens. So a lot of creativity, creative ideas there. And there are a lot of opportunities. So just because you have a smaller space, it doesn't mean you can't food garden. So that's like a big takeaway I just want to share.
That's really good news. You know what, early in the life of Grow Green Guide, we did a market survey of the population of Vancouver to see how many people gardened in the region and what kind of space they have. We discovered that 75% of the people in Metro Vancouver identify as having a garden of some size. That's a lot of people that are gardening. And that of those people, 50% were gardening in 150 square meters or less. So most of the people that are gardening out there have small spaces and shouldn't be discouraged. There's a lot that you can do in a small space, and you can certainly grow food in a small space.
Absolutely.
You do something which I think is right on the cutting edge of what people are doing that I would love you to share with the people who are watching today. Can you talk a little bit about food forests and what those are and how you approach that?
Yeah, so I guess like a bit about like my general philosophy towards like food gardening. Like I really like to integrate, edible plants into all sorts of different settings, and that's just a part of being creative and maximizing, real estate because a lot of the times garden space is so limited. So with food forests, like now you're thinking like, oh, she's going to talk about like large scale, like where's this going? But the term is kind of confusing. It's not like we're really growing in a forest, and it's not like we're creating a forest. It really is an approach to food gardening where you're maximizing vertical space. So it's very similar to what I was saying with the small space growing, where you bring things up. With food forests, like if you start looking into the literature, and a lot of the prescribed ways of constructing a food forest is to integrate or establish 7 vertical growing layers. And just to quickly run through that, there's the underground layer. It could be things like, I don't know, like potatoes, Jerusalem artichokes. And then there's like a persistent ground cover layer. So for me, I'm thinking a lot of the living thymes, or even really cute strawberries. Those act as like a wonderful ground cover that are really pretty and they have flowers. The next layer up is herbaceous. So I'm thinking like the perennial like mints that always come up, and also like fennels and artichokes. And then now we're thinking like more woody things as we get taller. Shrubs, it could be your blueberries. Like for me, I do goji berries, gooseberries, currants, the shrub layer. And then now we're thinking about trees too. Like, yes, you can incorporate trees, and it doesn't have to be like a full-blown, full-size apple tree, but like dwarf varieties. You can play with that kind of thing. Hawthorns are really great. It's a nice scale. Dogwoods are wonderful as well. And then, there's also this canopy layer. If you have an existing, like really, really tall tree, you can, work with that as well. But the main thing is to maximize the growing area and just be creative. Oh, and one last layer is the climbers. And that's layer 7. So, that's really what a food forest is about, is to, identify or create opportunities to grow like outside of like a boxed setting. A lot of the times we think like a vegetable bed. It's not necessarily a bed that we're thinking about right now. So I know for your first session, when you had Tara Moreau on, she spoke about like interplanting and intercropping. And for me, I think of food forest as like a larger long-term scale of that practice, where you're thinking about, how a plant grows. Like a shrub is longer lived and may take up more space, but you can plant things around it or underneath it. And, it creates a lot of textures and a lot of little like cool areas where you can like then underplant with, neat things. That's a lot of information, but I'm just trying to paint a picture of like something that's very different from like the very linear or box type growing environments that we're very accustomed to seeing.
So just so people get a sense of how achievable this is, I understand that you've been putting a food forest into your front garden in a residential lot in Vancouver. So it's not impossible to do.
No, not impossible. And what's really beautiful about thinking this way, and like how to approach gardens in general, is that it's a long-term project. Really, no one is forcing you to like expedite this gardening process to have a finished project. What I did with my front area, which was like honestly full of weeds, and the soil was like, I don't know, it wasn't the best soil. What I did was cover cropped with like a seeding mix of like buckwheat and clovers and a lot of things that provided green manures and flowers like for the first season. And I chopped that down, worked it into the soil, and really built up the soil. And then like I started planting trees and shrubs. So it's really a multiphasic approach to transforming the land. It really is like a big project, but it doesn't have to be like labor intensive, like all at once. And that's really the beauty of it. And you get to see how plants mature, and you get to really figure out, what works and what doesn't work.
Brilliant. We have a question from someone. She has managed to pull off something I've been trying to do for the last couple of weeks. So I've I wonder if she would send me some information about where she got this thing. She says she got a cattle fence panel to make a trellis that she's using for her climbing veggies like cucumbers. Um, she says, is that a good idea? Any feedback for how to save space in beds using trellises? I've been looking for a cattle fence to do that with.
Yes.
I haven't been able to find one. The closest thing I found is like rebar mesh. But I guess it's the same kind of idea. If you were to make a
So
trellis, is that a good space saving device?
yes. Yeah, I've been looking for the cattle panel, like the 6 by 6 like inch cattle panel, and
Yeah, me too.
they're about like 18 feet long and 4 feet wide. There's actually one place out in the valley that is quite popular, but I just don't have like a large truck to like bring that back. But it is available, and that's probably the best way to raise things up really, really high. And it's really quite sturdy if you like secure with like metal posts. And definitely it frees up space. And not only that, if you're growing cucumbers, it really gives it good airflow, because like I've stopped growing cucumbers on the ground just because of like pests, and really pollinators don't have great access to the flowers. So by growing it up, you give the plant light and air circulation, good pollination, and it's easy to harvest too. So if you can get your hands on something that can give you a tall trellis, go for it, because yeah, and they look
Yeah.
really nice too.
I've had the same experience with cucumbers. It wasn't until I grew them up on a trellis that I had any success. And then it was crazy. There were so many cucumbers. I was giving them to the food bank. It was just, they went a bit nuts.
Yeah.
Someone is asking, how do you keep the aphids off your cucumbers?
Aphids off cucumbers. I typically don't have issues with aphids. Um, for me, I try not to apply anything to my food plants. You know, the thing with aphids is that if you have like a hose, just use a jet stream of water and just blast them off, and just keep doing that for about a week. Just be consistent with it, and you're actually decreasing the population over time. So I mean, that's probably the most natural way of lowering pest populations. And kind of related to that, if I can just kind of like dip back into the food forest, the introduction of shrubs is really great, because in addition to giving you like nice foliage and a lot of structure and depth to your garden, it gives your garden space protection and shelter and perch areas for birds. And birds, as we know, love feasting on slugs and worms and other insects. So by by welcoming birds into your garden, they're taking, they're helping you with that balance naturally, and really you don't have to get involved. And I'm really big on the more natural organic practices. If I don't have to go and buy a bottle of something, if I don't have to put something together and spray on my edible plants, like that's what I'm looking for.
That sounds, I'm sold. I'm with you. Something else that you do that I think is quite wonderful is you have started a seed stand. Maybe you could tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so if probably over my shoulder you see this box over here, and really it's like a cardboard beer flat taped onto a cut up pizza box. And I call it my hacky seed stand, because this all happened mid-March, when we're learning more about COVID and like what we need to do to stay safe. And mid-March is usually the start of this seeding window where a lot of gardeners flock to the garden shops, and they start buying seeds online as well. And with people taking precautions and not wanting to go to the store in person, they're like, oh gosh, how am I going to get my seeds on time? So I was hearing a lot of that online. So I thought, well, I mean, I've got a lot of seeds in my seed stash. I mean, I may as well bag them up and put them onto something like this and see if anyone wants to take seeds for free. So I whipped that thing up and I stuck it on like the corner of my street, and I'm like, okay, let's see if anyone takes it. And by the end of the afternoon, like all of my lettuce seeds were gone. I'm like, great, people are interested. So that really encouraged me to like dig deeper into my seed pile and just keep bagging stuff up. And I'll just show you here what it looks like. So it's just like a little plastic baggie for nice clean wipe down if you want to go home and keep clean. So mostly on weekends, on like when it's really nice out, I would put the stand out, and for the whole weekend, I would just be replenishing seeds. And it was great because I think word spread on Facebook groups that there's this free seed stand in my area, and people would just come. It became a small destination, which is really neat. I got to meet people from other neighborhoods, and of course, like neighbors from my area who are just, walking their dogs, and they just pop by and take some seeds.
It couldn't be more wonderful. What a great way of making community. I've been also doing a lot more walking in my neighborhood and walking up and down the back lanes because I don't usually. And I'm giving myself a little garden tour of people's back gardens. It seems like a lot more people are gardening this year. It seems like there's a lot more interest, and I think it's absolutely wonderful that you found a way to help people in your neighborhood with their gardening. Is such a, I mean, it doesn't look like it was expensive to do or necessarily a lot of extra work for you. Are people leaving seeds there too?
Yeah. So once people are like, oh, there's this activity going on, I want to kind of get involved. Or I think maybe their thought was like, well, I've got a seed stash too. Since people know about this location, maybe I'll just drop it off there. And they would contact me, and I've had people drop off bags of their seeds, and they just kindly ask like, oh, do you mind bagging them up? I'm like, yeah, of course. Like, so I'd bag stuff up and tape it up there, and it was great. It was great. Just this whole like sharing network.
Is it too late for seeding now? Like, what are you seeding? What seeds would you start right now? What have you got in your box?
Oh, we're in bean season right now. If you read up on how to, grow beans, you look for like a warm, dry spell. I mean, look at the weather right now. It's gorgeous. So the soil is warm. The seeds aren't going to really rot in a lot of cold, wet, like soil. So this is a good time to be starting your beans. And I always recommend direct sowing if possible, like right where they're supposed to grow, just because like beans and peas are, they're quite fussy with having their roots like kind of messed with. So sowing them now is really, really good.
That's good advice. It's not too late. And
No.
even throughout the year, when you're working, I guess, with people with small gardens who want to have food that is available throughout the year, is it ever, what could you plant for fall crops or winter crops or spring crops? Like what is the seasonal round in Vancouver? What's possible?
Yeah. So, I mean, like a lot of people, they're thinking about tomatoes and their cucumbers right now, and as we enter the warmer season. But, also as we enter the warmer time, it's actually the right time to be thinking about winter gardening. So, cabbages, broccoli, cauliflower, things that take a longer time to mature. And you can start planning for a crop for fall and winter harvest in June and July. So really, as a food gardener, it's really a year-round thing, which is a great opportunity for new gardeners who feel like they kind of missed the boat on certain things, or maybe they didn't see the best success with their first go at sowing and like taking care of something. Like, for new gardeners, I want to say, don't feel discouraged. Even the most experienced gardeners will not see consistent successes. So here's your opportunity to sow that next set of kale, sow another round of lettuces, and even try broccoli. Why not? And grow those in the summer, or maybe later in the summer. And make sure they're established enough. And if you have the ability to set up a bit of winter protection, sometimes it could be just like a little post with some like plastic on top. Give that your plants a little protection, and you may be able to harvest throughout the winter. And it's just so rewarding knowing that you can just grow food for yourself. It may not be like a great abundance, but it's fun. It keeps you gardening and engaged with gardening throughout the year.
I love that advice. If you're just a beginner starting out, you never really have a mistake unless you don't learn from it. There's probably some good sports quote about that I don't know because I'm not very sporty about, it's only a failure if you fail to learn something from it. That's really inspirational advice.
Yeah, they're all learning opportunities. Just keep note and keep a record, right? Don't make the same mistake again, right?
Right.
And then, just still a lot of trial and error with gardening.
As if you hadn't already shared enough stuff that's really cool about your work. There's something else you do that I'm quite interested in. I understand that you're interested in growing Chinese medicinal herbs. Is that right?
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
you could tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, I grow the normal culinary herbs that we're used to. They're versatile and I like to share with people. They're easy to propagate and they're great for pollinators. If you've had time, like they flower and they look really pretty. But for me, I guess the next layer to, growing food and growing edible things and having like a food forest slowly develop is to look into things that are maybe from different areas. And for me, I guess there's a bit of family history. Both my grandfathers they practiced traditional Chinese medicine. One was like a practitioner. Another one had a herbal shop. So that's really cool. And I think about that often. But I guess part of my upbringing is also just consuming herbs as like an everyday kind of thing, like have your everyday kind of tonic in your soup. So, I remember growing up, like, what do these things look like? They all just look like brown dried things. So, as I, got my education in like learning about plants, I'm like, well, maybe I should try growing these things because I'm curious as to what they look like and if they can actually do well in our climate here in Vancouver. And I bought seed or I found like little, divisions of plants and I've been growing certain things. I'm like, wow, these are really beautiful. One of the very important Chinese herbs is red. The common name is red sage, but really it looks like a normal sage with the purple flowers. And I'm like, wow, this grows really well. And like, it has a lot of ornamental value. And that's, that's what I really am interested in because a lot of these plants can probably be integrated into all sorts of garden settings. I mean, we don't have to think about them as like just separate plants. They're not just edible plants or medicinal plants. At the end of the day, they're just plants, but they have additional uses. So I'm just kind of exploring that area. It's really fun because it keeps me learning.
Where do you source? I guess if you wanted to start messing around or experimenting with kind of traditional Chinese herbal foods, where do you get your seeds?
Um, Actually, one of the best sources for like really neat, oddball, like herbal things is Salt Spring Seeds. I really like going to them for like neat, oddball things. And I think their website is back up and running, and you just go through them, and there are a lot of neat things. And that's where I like learn about all of these plants, like red sage, and there's one type of lily that they sell. Um, and I'm like, wow, okay, if they can grow it and provide seeds, I'm going to grow it because I want to see what these look like. And some of these, you don't have to find, specialty suppliers. There are plants that are commonly available and already in the nursery trade that are used in traditional medicines. So things like balloon flowers, they're very low with a really like pretty like bluish purple flowers. Forsythia, honeysuckles, what else is there? Like, yeah, lilies even are used in traditional Chinese medicine. So a lot of these things that are actually floating around, um, they're available. So if people are interested, they can, try to source, what they want to grow. And the benefit of that is that, if you want to actually consume these things, that it's going to be coming from a clean source, which is your garden, because a lot of the Chinese herbal medicines, they're imported, and sometimes you may not be fully confident about, what kind of pesticides possibly that they've applied, during the growing process. You don't know how they're stored. So those are one of the benefits. So whatever you put in your body, you want to feel confident with that.
That kind of ties into a question we've got from someone about fertilizers and liquid applications. What are your thoughts on slow release top dress fertilizers versus liquid applications, or would you recommend a different approach?
I mean, it depends on what you're growing in. I know for the first food gardening session, you talked a lot about containerized gardening. So I know the slow release, granular, like very balanced organic fertilizers was recommended. And I personally use that as well in a containerized setting. And, in a pinch, like using that in like a garden bed works just as well. I usually use like a 4-4-4, like a Gaia, like what is it? The Gaia,
Gaia
like
green or
yeah, like I like that just because it's slow release. It doesn't shock the plant. It doesn't feed it with like too much nitrogen or anything that produces like an abundance of like juicy growth which translates into like a big like aphid buffet, because that's what they're looking for when they're looking for their food. So yeah, just look around, see what you're comfortable with. There are a lot of products on the market. If granular is not your thing, there are different like kelp or fish solutions that you can apply to your beds as well.
we have another question about bindweed. What's your favorite method for getting rid of bindweed?
Bindweed. Keep digging. Be persistent.
It's quite pernicious, that one.
Yeah. I mean, there's that one, and also buttercup. And I always recommend using a digging fork, because some people, they'll attack weeds using like spades or shovels, but with those tools, because you're like digging into the ground, you're severing a lot of those parts of the plants that can actually just keep growing new baby plants. So using like a four-tine digging fork, just wiggle the soil, and I recommend just slowly teasing out the roots, and that way you can get most of the underground part out. And it's just being persistent, and that's just a part of gardening. These are very successful plants, and that's why we consider them weeds. So it's just gotta keep fighting them if you feel like they're like impeding, growth on the things that you want to keep in your garden.
I've got some advice about getting rid of bindweed. When I was a child, my grandma would give us a penny each for each bindweed plant they pulled out of the lawn. Just saying, bribery
Yeah.
is a possible control method for getting rid of them.
Oh, and actually, another thing I forgot to mention is kind of related to food forests and the soil and everything, protecting the soil. Sheet mulching is also really great if you have like a weedy patch. So in a nutshell, what sheet mulching is taking some sort of like layer that essentially smothers weeds. So, I mean, bindweed will find its way out eventually, but if you can stop it from accessing light to keep growing, at least it slows it down so that you can maybe work on other things in the garden. Because I know like people want to be in their garden doing stuff, harvesting their food, and not necessarily going out for half an hour a day attacking bindweed. So by laying down something like wet cardboard and topping it off with some like composted material and just letting that slowly decay or smother out, it's a really good passive way to just let that be and then work on something else.
I have never really thought about the time management aspect of gardening. I think about vegetation management, but I've never really thought about it that way. That's interesting. To come up with a solution that gives you more time to do other things.
It's hard. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, I was taught like strategy, like Egan Davis always taught strategy when doing gardening tasks. So, thinking about the different types of weeds. I mean, this is like sort of like a separate topic, but, since we're talking about weeding, like look for the annual weeds that are going to flower and just shoot seeds everywhere. Because if you don't attack those annual weeds that, want to develop seed banks in your soil, then what does that mean? You're going to be like weeding as a part of your everyday activity during the growing season. So if you can stop that and spend like a few hours, or even depending on your space, eliminate that, and that's kind of out of the picture, and you can work on something else. So it's all strategy and just working with your space. And again, that comes with, working in your garden and learning about your garden and just how it behaves throughout the different phases of the year.
A couple more questions. I have never grown okra before. Someone's asking a question about okra. Can we grow it in Vancouver? I've never tried.
I'm trying it for the first year. Yeah. It's exciting. I mean, I'm hoping this hot, dry weather, plus some moisture is really going to help it take off. Like right now, my plants are about 6 6 inches like tall, just in the ground. But they got leaves, they're looking okay. So I'm hoping something's gonna happen. Yeah. So
We'll
I'm gonna
report
give
back.
it a shot. Yeah.
Report back with you. I think a final question before we wrap up. To the people who have been asking questions, if we don't get to your question, don't give up on us. We will be posting answers to the Facebook page afterward. Yeah, if we didn't get to your question, just be patient with us. We'll get answers to you. Last question is, how do you deal with ants in your vegetable garden?
Ants. Yeah, there seems to be like a big ant thing going on right now. I just find with warmer weather, they're just coming out. So it could be a part of the weather.
Yeah.
And whenever I'm asked about that, I always say, well, think about it as, ants and other insects as just a part of your garden. So as long as they're not invading your house and really just destroying things, it's just a part of gardening and gardens. And I talked about shrubs and birds and how birds keep insects in check. I mean, if you've ever dug into a pile of compost or soil, you're going to find the ant eggs and all sorts of like grubs and stuff, and that's really food for birds. And it's again, as long as they're not invading your house, and I don't know, it's just a part of
part of nature.
It's a part of nature.
Mm-hmm. I've had good luck before when ants have been in the garden and they start coming towards my windowsills, putting out cloves. And that seems to have repelled them. That is my experience. Something I learned about online and tried it and had some success with. So a natural solution that didn't involve ant traps or poisons.
Yeah, I've tried cinnamon. I've read about cucumber peels as well. Like I've gone through all those things as well, but I've never could stop them from, like it never really changed their behavior. So I'm like, oh, maybe I just got to live with them.
Live with it. Okay. I think that is us for today. Christina, I can't thank you enough for joining us. Thank you for sharing your experience. I've learned so much from you. I feel like I'm going to need some coaching from you in the future. Of course, there's more information about the Grow Green, more information at growgreenguide.ca. You can take a look at our blogs for some more gardening advice and sign up for our mailing list to get updates as they're available. Again, we'll be providing responses to questions we didn't get to on our website as soon as we can get to them. And next Wednesday, we'll be back with another session with a new guest on a new topic. And we look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you so much for joining us today.